Clap once. You can hear me? Let's clap twice. Wow, that actually works. Wow. Okay, so this is going to help. Again, we'd love to start on time and end on time. So out of respect of everyone's time, I just want to get us going. We do have an overflow room. It's in the Buena Park room. So for those of you that are standing, if you prefer to sit, okay, if you could head behind these partitions, someone will guide you to the Buena Park room. If our staff, from our district and our sites can help anyone that's looking for the Buena Park room, that would be great. All right, so if you need any interpretation services, we have that as well. Behind this set of partitions here, we have interpretation services in Spanish, Korean, and Vietnamese, okay? Si ocupan servicios de interpretación, por favor, pasen para acá, para atrás del otro lado de esta pared, y ahí les pueden ayudar. All right? Okay, we're going to give it a few seconds as we have some people transitioning over to the overflow room. Okay, we're going to get started again. So I think we have everyone in the overflow room. So again, if you hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Awesome. My name is Robert Saldivar. I'm the executive director of our district here. It's a true pleasure to be facilitating tonight's gathering for our LCAP, and really just on behalf of our Board of Trustees and members of Cabinet, we want to thank everyone for taking the time out of your very busy day to be here. It's truly an honor, and we're very grateful for that. Before we have our superintendent, Mr. Mike Matsuda, come up and do a formal welcome, we want to definitely recognize some of our folks in the crowd. We have board members from other districts that have joined us, so we want to make sure we recognize. We have two from our neighboring, our main feeder district here, Anaheim Elementary. We have Ryan Reles and Juan Alvarez, if you want to just... All right. We have, thank you. I saw it, Ryan. And then we have we have Mark Sanchez as well from Anaheim Elementary. Mark. And we have Carolyn Torres from Santa Ana Unified. I believe she went to the overflow room. And then I believe we have Dr. Jeff Kim as well from Irvine Unified. And he might have gone to the overflow room as well. And then we have Lauren Klatzker from Fullerton Join. You see her as well. Yeah, all right. Did we miss anyone? Okay, I think we're good. All right. So again, welcome, and again, thank you for being here. I want to, at this point, turn it over to our very own superintendent, Mr. Mike Matsuda, for a formal welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. Saldivar, Anaheim High School grad. Welcome. And you know what? I think this is one of our largest LCAP gatherings ever. So congratulations. Awesome. So let's hear it for who's in the house. We'll start with the most. You guys are all important, but the most important are our students. Let's hear it up. Let's give it up for our students. And their parents. And our teachers. All of our classified folks, our social workers, our counselors, our site administrators, all of our district administrators, and our cabinet. And a special shout out to the leaders of our associations. Let's give it up for them. And our collective bosses, our board of trustees. In fact, we have one here, one of our newest board member, and definitely our youngest, and also an Anaheim High School grad, Jessica Guerrero. So we are so very proud of this process. We at AUHSD believe more than ever the importance of our student and our community voices in helping to prioritize and recommend what matters, what's important for you in your education. We are so proud that we've been able to, over the years, to really be able to hear you and respond in terms of prioritizing our pledge to you. In fact, that big sign right there says the Anaheim Union Educational Pledge, which involved a promise from all of our partners, UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, Fullerton College, Cypress College, the City of Anaheim, and really now over 90 corporate and nonprofit partners who believe in your future. We're so proud that we are probably the first district to teach beyond test scores. And we call these the 5 C's, probably the most important life skills that you will ever have. And we are committed to not just your success in education, but your success in careers and your success in life. We are committed to you young people becoming adults so you can participate as healthy parents, healthy neighbors, healthy uncles and aunts, healthy and caring and empathetic and kind Americans. We need kindness more than ever in this country if we are going to heal from all of the divisiveness that's out there. We are determined to ensure that every child is loved with compassion and comes out of AUHSD a caring and committed adult, so that we together can lead this country toward the unlimited you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to once again turn it over to Mr. Robert Solivar. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Matsuda. We appreciate that, and I know we've already acknowledged a lot of our folks, but let's actually see. Let's just kind of gauge how many folks are actually here from some of the groups that we mentioned earlier. So, if you're a certificated member, please stand up, and if you're along the back walls, just raise your hand. Let's kind of get a certificated member. Please stand up. Okay, on any of our sites. Okay, so we have counselors, teachers, social workers. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Big round of applause for you guys again. If you are if you are classified members of any of our at any of our sites or district, please stand up or raise your hand. Awesome. Thank you for being here. If you are a community member, please stand up or raise your hand. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. If you are a parent or guardian or member of a student's family, please stand up or raise your hand. Awesome. Thank you. And if you are a student, please stand up. Awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you again. And obviously, everything we're doing today and everything we do on a day-to-day basis is for our students in our community. If we could go to our next slide, please, and just bear patience with us as we go from one slide to another. So we like to start all of our gatherings and meetings at our sites and at the district level with a reflection on our mission and vision and our core values. As you can see here on the screens behind me, our mission and our vision here. The Anaheim Union High School District, in partnership with the greater community, will graduate socially aware, civic-minded students who are life-ready by cultivating the soft and hard skills, as our superintendent referred to, the 5 C's, and our vision to create a better world through unlimited you. Our core values, if you go to the next slide, here are our district core values that we believe in. These values will help us achieve our vision and our mission and ensure that we are doing what is best for our students and families. Please take a moment to review our core values, keeping in mind the importance of the LCAP process, and let's think of a core value that resonates with you and how it might align to the work we are about to engage in through this process. I'll give you a few seconds to review those core values, and you also have them in your spiral notebook that we gave you. With that core value in mind, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So as our superintendent, Mr. Matsuda, mentioned earlier, we've moved away from traditional ways of teaching, and that's teaching to the test. And we're focusing now, and we've been focusing our instructional priorities on skill-based education, the 5 C's, voice, purpose, and the technical skills. What we call our CPSF, the Career Preparedness Systems Framework, helps us make good on our promise to our students and our families. And that you see on the screen again. The promise to provide thoughtful, relevant, and engaging experiences that prepare our students for meaningful and purposeful lives. Next slide, please. So the LCAP. Okay, so here at our district, we see the LCAP development process as an opportunity to tell our story, to highlight our accomplishments, to gain comprehensive insights from you and all of our educational partners that are here in the room. This is year 2 of 3 in our LCAP process. So what's the purpose of the LCAP? Right, that's the question. What's the purpose? Our purpose for the LCAP this year is to assess and evaluate last year's priorities. And based on our most current data that you will be exposed to and you'll get to assess and review and reflect on, we will come to a consensus to maintain existing priorities and or make changes to them. This is a time to dream big and make recommendations based on our needs. During the focus groups, we will be looking at different types of district-wide data, both satellite and map data. Recommendations that come from these focus groups will then be considered and implemented as our budget allows us to. Now let's keep in mind that we are in declining enrollment, and there are other factors like one-time monies, attendance, and ADA that can also impact our budget. The LCAP development, organization, and planning is a unifying process that involves significant and purposeful engagement with our educational partners. If we could go to the next slide, please. So when having our conversations around the data that we will be looking at and making recommendations, let's keep in mind our important student groups that our LCAP calls out. Our socioeconomically disadvantaged students, our English learners, our students with disabilities, our homeless youth, and our foster youth. When looking at these groups, what AUHSD core value comes to mind for you and why? Comes to mind to you and why? So again, thinking of the core values, so we could go to the next slide, back to the core values. So the groups that we just talked about, what core value comes to mind and why? So we're going to do a quick think, pair, share activity. So we're going to give you about 30 seconds to think about the core value that comes to mind when thinking of our students at the LCAP, the student groups that the LCAP calls out. And why does that come to mind? And then with your partner, you will have a conversation about which core value comes to mind and why. Okay, 30 seconds to think, and then we'll pair share. You want to go back to what page is the Okay, with the partner, to your right or to your left, or in groups of 3, let's have a conversation. Okay, we're going to take about 20 more seconds. So just finishing our thoughts up. Okay, so we'd like to have just a couple of share outs. So would anyone like to share out and just what core value came to mind? And we could put the student groups back on the slide. And what core value came to mind and why? Anyone that would like to share? I will summarize what was said. Any volunteers? Yes, we have a student right up here.
I think number 3 because it shows like you
Go back to.
like it's an asset based system, so control is supposed to start with the string and literally that goes to the show. So like English learners they can't really read their both of them still if they don't like half the thing they kind of like yeah they kind of
So thank you for that. So you said number 3, an asset-based instructional approach focused on our community strengths and in nurturing everyone's potential. And in particular, you talked about our English language learners. Thank you, appreciate that. From one of our students. One more. Can we have one more share out? Yes. Thank you. Another one of our students in number 4, moving the needle towards equity and justice. And in particular, you talked about our students who are foster youth, homeless, students with disabilities, right? And making sure they have the same opportunities as everyone else. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here, what we have here now are our 3 LCAP goals. These are the goals that we came up with through this process a few years back that are aligned to the 8 state priorities, our district vision, our district mission, and core values. Every year, we like to take a moment to revisit them and ensure that they continue to represent our district vision, mission, and core values. So what we're going to ask is we'll read each one of them, okay, and then we'll do a thumbs up for consensus to maintain, or a neutral thumb for anyone who has a recommendation. Any recommendations for any of the 3 LCAP goals, we will obviously document, and then we will bring that back to our steering committee and revisit the recommendations that were made tonight. So LCAP goal number 1, and just because of the mic and this is being live streamed, I'm going to go ahead and read them out instead of having volunteers do it. So all students will demonstrate college, career, and life readiness and success through implementation of the 5 C's. That's LCAP goal number 1. So as we think about that goal, are we going to give it a thumbs up and continue with the exact same goal, or do we want to, give it a neutral thumb and make a recommendation for us to consider? Okay, so on the count of 3, let's see a thumbs up or neutral thumbs. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we could help scan the room for any neutral thumbs. Do we see any? Anyone that wants to give? Do we see one somewhere? Mike, you said you see one? Okay, yes. Go ahead. So the recommendation is to revisit this goal and think about in terms of the work being done, the workload, and the stress and anxiety it may cause, and if there's another way to incorporate that or at least address that through the goals, okay? All right, thank you for that. And I think that was the only one, correct? Okay. All right, so moving on to LCAP goal number 2. Provide meaningful educational engagement opportunities for all parents and families to advocate for all students. That is LCAP goal number 2. As we think about number 2, are we going to uphold it with the thumbs up, or are we going to make a recommendation with the neutral thumb? Okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, and 3. Help us scan the room. Think we're good? One sideways. Yes. Correct.
Sometimes I'm on school site council for one of the schools, and I do take time off once a month for that, but it's not something that you can do and be as involved as you'd like to be. So I'd like to see some more opportunities outside of those 8 to 5 hours if possible, which I'm sure are difficult because
Right.
you guys work 8 to 5 as well, so I'm not sure, but some suggestions, some opportunities for parents that work from 8 to 5.
Okay.
would be great.
Thank you. So the recommendation is we have many working parents at each of our sites, typically working from hours like 8 to 5. So providing more options, more flexible options for parents to be involved as we're planning these events. And then we have another. Thank you. Is that correct? Is that okay? Another neutral thumb. Okay, so, I'm sorry? After hours. So again, on the topic of after hours, we have events that happen at our partner, higher ed partner schools like Cal State Fullerton, Fullerton College, Cypress College, and UCI, who are all part of the Anaheim Collaborative. And those typically take place during the day for our parents. It's parent workshops. So maybe bringing those to the campus instead and having after working hours options. Okay, so thank you for the recommendation. Okay, was there any other? Yes.
So I know for our school, Patella, our principal does an amazing job at holding meetings via Zoom, so people can attend. I know there's lives where I see moms working in the background, but they're doing what they can to go to those meetings. I don't know if maybe other schools can do something like that, keep it on Zoom. Also, I'd like to see more. For example, when I go to those meetings, there's a lot of Spanish speakers, so maybe implementing more workshops in Spanish. I know it might be tough,
Right.
but we do live in a city that we have a lot of parents that only speak Spanish.
Right. So more flexible, more virtual options, right, is what I'm hearing. And then also considering for our Spanish-speaking folks or folks that speak language other than English, and it's a you know, at any site to have more options for them as well in their native language. Okay, perfect, thank you. And then I think I saw one more over here. So the recommendation to also consider Saturday academies as days to hold some of these workshops and parent events. Okay, thank you. We will bring all that back to the steering committee as well. All right, and then our third LCAP goal is provide and nurture a safe, reflective, responsive, and positive school culture. So that's our third LCAP goal. Again, as we think about that goal, are we going to give it a thumbs up, maintain, or a neutral thumb and have some recommendations? Okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I think I see some neutral thumbs. So we're going to start on this side. One, yep.
I think maybe we need to add the word culturally responsive, the phrase culturally responsive to the culture.
So if I heard, so bring back the, say it again?
Add culturally responsive to the culture.
So add culturally responsive to the goal. Thank you. Okay, and then did I see another one over here? Yes? So the recommendation is to Okay, so recommendations to revisit open enrollment to honors classes and classes like that, and consider students that maybe it's going to be a little more challenging for them, and what can we do to better support those students, and including the students that are in there, trying to be successful. Does that summarize it? Okay, thank you. We have one here.
I would like it if you added some phrasing that specifically called out our students' emotional well-being. I know that kind of says it, but I think it should be clearer that
Okay.
that's a focus.
So something that calls out their emotional well-being.
Our social
Emotional well-being. Okay, we got that down. Thank you. Okay, we have another one back here. You're asking how we're going to go about achieving this goal? So, yeah. So that's the question is how are we going to go about achieving this goal? And that's what the next 3 sessions are about, right? The focus group sessions. That's where we'll dive deeper into what does that look like, okay? And what previous recommendations have been made, all right? And we have one here. Okay. So recommendation is to, focus more on campus safety as a part of this goal. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that's something we'll dive into in the sessions as well. Okay. Okay, we have another one.
Might we add the word restorative somewhere in there?
So
Restorative processes.
a recommendation to consider adding the word restorative somewhere in the restorative practices, processes. Okay, got that. Thank you. Anything else? We have 2 here, so we'll go here first, and then we'll head over there. Yep.
Make our school more mental health awareness. Be it safe, because I know mental health is a big
Yeah.
issue.
Right.
So make sure it's a safe area for all students that deal with anxiety,
Yes.
depression. So having a safe area for all students.
So again, dealing with mental health, which I know that was a recommendation, and then that will definitely, we'll dive into that much deeper in the focus group areas. But definitely we hear the mental health piece, so we'll see how we could have it more reflected in the goal. And then the last one.
Well-maintained and updated facilities, that also will help a lot our students.
Right.
Feel more
Yes.
happy at their school.
Absolutely. Okay, we have facilities being maintained and updated, and then I see that we have one more from a student. So the recommendation would be for student-driven initiatives. So the recommendation for more student-driven initiatives to help keep our schools safe. Okay? All right. All right, so thank you for that. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so some of the data. So over the next 3 sessions, we will be diving into some data. Data that, as you see on this slide here, it's different types of data from satellite data to map data. Street data is what you see here, right? This is street data. Data that we call street data are interviews, gatherings where we just collected some street data, some feedback from you folks, right? So that will be an ongoing process. But it's more formalized. When we talk about more formalized data, we're talking about looking at satellite data and some map data. So satellite data would be in the form of, for example, some of our traditional markers, like our graduation rates, our district graduation rates, our district A through G rates, and things like that, attendance. Where map data might be more surveys, right, that we give district-wide. Now, in terms of site-specific data, a lot of our sites have been doing that. Now, we had a parent LCAP orientation for parents that were new to the process a few weeks ago, and we heard loud and clear that they want to see more of that at the sites. So we did bring that up with our principals, and we do have a plan to not only implement that for this year, where our principals during the month of March are going to be inviting parents to look at more site-specific data, right? But also moving forward, how we can do that consistently on a year-to-year basis. And so you'll see more of that. For our staff, I know that all of our sites look at site-specific data already. So this is some of the data that we will be looking at. And again, you know, the emphasis being that the data highlights, obviously, some of the things that we're doing well, but also asking the questions, what's missing, right? Or what is it that we can do better, right? So when you look at this data from that, you know, from an inquiry lens, ask those questions that we should be asking of the data, okay? Moving on to our next slide. So our learner progress. So again, we're taking the opportunity here to tell our story, going back to one of the previous slides, highlight our accomplishments, and gain comprehensive insights from you, our educational partners. Through the LCAP process, we want to identify our priorities based on our most recent data. So here's some recent data. This is a time to dream big. Okay, so we're talking now about when you go into these focus group sessions over the next 3 meetings, this is a time to dream big and make recommendations based on our needs, the needs of our district, and in particular, the groups that our LCAP is calling out, right? The ELs and our students with IEPs and our foster youth, and so the 5 groups that we talked about, right? During the focus groups, we will be looking at different types of district-wide data, both satellite and map data. Recommendations that come from these focus groups will then be considered and implemented as our budget allows us to, as we talked about before, okay? So again, we have some satellite data here. As we see, we have data from 5 years ago, and then our most recent data. We see our graduation rates district-wide from 5 years ago, and then 5 years later, right, this past year. A through G completion rates, so on and so forth. So as you scan this data, what comes to mind, right? What questions comes to mind? What celebrations do we see? What are the questions that we need to be asking? Okay, so I'm sure a lot of, and if we were to make this a session where we had tables and we were doing table talks, we would give you time to have that discussion amongst you guys, right? Which is what we do a lot at a lot of our workshops and in the classroom and things like that, right? So questions that have come up in the past is, well, I want to see more site relevant data. What about the school, the community that I live in? What does that look like for the community that I live in? Well, and then you break that down even further, right? You disaggregate it even further. Well, what about our EL students? How are they graduating? Our students with disabilities? What are their rates, their A through G rates, right? So you break that down even further, right? Some people might ask, well, how do we compare to other districts? Like, that's great to see that we're moving in the right direction, but how do we compare to other districts, to just neighboring districts? If we go to the next slide, here's some other data in regards to from our higher ed partners. So they also track our students through the Anaheim Collaborative, which a lot of you are aware of or know a lot about it. We have a partnership with UCI, Cal State Fullerton, Fullerton College, and Cypress College, where they're tracking our students that are coming to them. So some recent data that they have shared with us is the average UCI student retention rate from students that don't belong to AUHSD that are at UCI is 86 to 88%. For our AUHSD students, it's 95 to 99%, right? So that's something to celebrate. Our students that go to UCI from our district are having more success than students that go to UCI from other districts. And we're talking about one of the top UCs in not only in the state, but in our country, right? Okay, moving on to the next one. So here's some more relevant data in terms of how do we compare to other districts. So you see, again, 5 years ago, our A through G rates, right? You see where the ones that are highlighted in yellow. So you see Anaheim Union at the top, and then the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the districts that we are ahead of when it comes to A through G rates. We weren't ahead of too many, just a couple of districts. 5 years later, through the work that we've done, through the LCAP process, all the hard work that goes on at our sites with our teachers, counselors, classified staff, everyone involved, right? Our parents, through the Anaheim Collaborative. 5 years later, we've surpassed so many districts when it comes to A through G data. But again, what questions can we ask of this data? Yes, definitely something to celebrate. Okay? But as we continue to push ourselves, as we continue to put positive tension on our organization, because at the end of the day, we're happy with this data, but we want to continue to do better for our students and our families and our community. What questions can we ask of this data? Right? How about we break it down further? Let's look at our students. What students are we talking about that are succeeding? Are they succeeding at the same rates? When you talk about, a student that might be foster youth versus a student that isn't foster youth, right? Things like that. If we go to the next slide, our graduation rates, very similar. In 2017, we were ahead of just a couple of districts, okay? 5 years later, through all the work that we just talked about, all the hard work going on in our district, thinking of our framework, CPSF, the focus on instruction in the classroom, our community service model that we've been implementing in our district. Now we are ahead of many, many districts that are our neighboring districts, okay? But again, what questions can we ask of this data, okay? All right, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now we are very fortunate and humbled to have Dr. Jose Moreno as one of our educational partners joining us this evening to help us through the next 20 minutes. So Dr. Moreno is an associate professor of Latino Education and Policy Studies and past chair of the Chicano and Latino Studies Department at California State University of Long Beach. Dr. Moreno recently served 2 terms as a city council member in Anaheim, having served as mayor pro tem in 2018. He also served 2 terms on the Board of Education for the Anaheim City School District, at the time Anaheim City, now Anaheim Elementary. Dr. Moreno currently serves as president of Los Amigos of Orange County, a 44-year-old grassroots group that meets weekly to help people through the most difficult of situations. Los Amigos is also one of AUHSD's educational partners that sits on the Community Schools Steering Committee. Dr. Moreno is also a father of 4 beautiful, intelligent young women, with the 3 older girls having attended, all of his girls having attended Sycamore Junior High and Anaheim High School. 3 of them currently in college and 1 currently attending Anaheim High School. Dr. Moreno is here to support us in contextualizing our data. He will push our thinking and encourage dialogue and inquiry that will help guide our conversations, ask the right questions, and sometimes ask difficult questions of our data as we go through the LCAP process. So a warm welcome to Dr. Jose Moreno.
Buenas noches. I don't think I've ever been this nervous, for reals. Too many familiar people that know. What did you just say? What did you say? How are you? Ahí vamos, ahí vamos. How many of you are feeling stressed? How many of you feel stressed at this point, wherever your life is, you're feeling stress? So I asked this of students at Cal State Long Beach, and I'll tell you, it's a trip. The first day of classes, I asked students that, and all hands go up. And I asked them, what are you stressed about? School. It's the first day of school. What are you stressed about? What's going to happen? Okay, but you don't know what's going to happen yet. What are you stressed about? What happened last time? What happened last time? So the learning that is really difficult for us is in education systems is how to remember to be human. How to remember to reclaim and sustain our humanity, which is why I'm proud to be an AUHSD dad, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we work best together to sustain one another as people, as youth, in our roles as parents, in our roles as teachers who are also parents, in our roles classified who are also residents and parents, in our roles as leaders, presumably, to share voices and express concerns and hope to others. I'd be remiss, however, if I didn't just start this conversation for me with you with a land acknowledgement that Anaheim is built on the ancestral land of the Gabrielino and the Tongva people, the indigenous people of the region. And we are appreciative of their stewardship and their caretaking of this land, to whom we owe much to, and to whom we must restore the ethics by which they took care of this land and its people. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. All right, there he is. Is it on presentation mode? Is it on presentation mode? Presentation mode? All right, well, is it PDF? Okay, who is that? Right, who doesn't know? Who doesn't speak Spanish and knows who he is? All right, here's what I'm curious about. Those of you, stand up if you don't speak Spanish. All right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I need one volunteer. I need one volunteer. Somebody tell me, how do you say his name? No, really? San Benito. San Benito. So is it Bad Bunny? Is it Bad Boni? Is it Bad Booney? Right? Or as we've come to know him and love him in my household, El Conejo Malo. Right? The Bad Bunny. If we could go to the next slide. So we're all VIPs, right? And so I have a question for you all, and actually that's what I was hoping with some of the slides is the Grammys. Here's the most controversial question happening at Cal State Long Beach Chicano Studies classes this week. Was Bad Bunny robbed? Should it have been Beyonce? Raise your hand if it should have been Beyonce, Queen B. Raise your hand if it should have been Bad Bunny. Raise your hand if you're like, yeah, Harry Styles, I feel you. All right, all right. We go to the next slide. So the thing that I've been asked to share with you and talk with you a little about through the multiple experiences and hats that I've had a chance to wear and continue to try to wear is a perpetual idea that we push at the university, that you're pushing, that we're pushing one another here at AUHSD, that the elementary districts are pushing if we're doing good education. And that is critical inquiry. That is, how do you know? How do you know what you know? How do we know what we know? So if you believe that Beyonce should have got the Grammy and deserved it, based on what? How do you know she was the top person? Harry Styles, how do we know? Bad Bunny, how do we know? How do we know how to say his name? How do we say his name? Who's correct? Right? And how do we decide that? So how do we decide? And that's the critical element of what the LCAP means. And I just want to remind you all, while I love the district, and for those of you who read Paulo Freire, those of you who've taken some good courses in education, he talks about the idea of false generosity. And what happens in systems that have been built, unfortunately, on waves of marginality, that is for a few, that what happens is when those systems are then asked to turn around and serve those who it didn't serve, it often does so in a very select and marginal way. Where if you don't become like them, then you don't get served. Prove yourself that you're like us, and then we serve you. It's an assimilationist policy, not simply cultural, racial, but an assimilationist to integrating to us. And AUHSD is now saying, we're here to serve you. You're not here to serve us. It's a powerful, powerful sentiment to change. But how do we know that that's true? And that's why the LCAP is so important. And while the district is saying, come join us and we'll give you tacos, we'll give you tacos. No other district does that. I think they serve like packaged food, right? If they serve at all. And they tell you, they invite you, and Paulo Freire reminds us and cautions us, be careful, system leaders, that you don't turn it into false generosity, that you're only inviting people to share with you what they think when you've already decided what you want to do. So the beauty of what the state of California has done for us, our legislators, is they said, in this LCAP, we're going to recognize that some districts, because of your context of your cities and your region and your history, have more struggle with certain systems. We're going to provide more resources. But for you to get those resources, we need to know how you're going to use them, and you're going to use a community process, and you're required to involve parents. You're required to involve teachers. So by law, you're here. By law. I say that, again, not because AUHSD doesn't want to do it, but there's one thing to do it because it's by law, as other districts do it. We often call it malicious compliance. They just do it because they have to. And then there's districts like ours who are embracing it, saying, come, challenge us, do you, be you, let us know what we need to be doing. And that's our task and our responsibility to do as people. Because then later, when things don't play out the way we like and we didn't participate, what can we do? There's a process for this work. So if we go to the next slide. So I'm going to share with you something that happened in another district. Some of you have, that are in our schools have taken your students to Cal State Long Beach with me to visit me in classrooms at Cal State Long Beach. It's pretty cool. How many of you have done that? Any teachers in here or counselors who've done that? A few of you. And it's pretty cool. They come and they sit in class. Another district came. They brought over 100 students and over 50 staff members and asked me to go and welcome them to the campus and say, look, Latinos can do it too. And they smiled, right? And be a role model. So I started to talk with these students in these communities, and I started showing them data, which was not expected, because in that we were doing some research on that district. So you won't really be able to see it from where you are, but what I decided to do was what we call intersectional data. And some people will try to scare you about that term, intersectionality. Is we looked at, they knew they had racial ethnic gaps on A through G completions. They knew that. The question was it because there's some racial stuff happening in the district? Or as most people said, it's because of class. It's because we have so many poor students and poor families in this area that it's class. So we disaggregated the data in this intersectional way, and I showed it to that community of folks from that district, 100 students, 50 staff members, counselors, principals, a couple of trustees. And I showed them, look, I'll just show you really quick, all students on the very left, 24% of students who are on free and reduced lunch in that district completed A through G. 37% of kids who are not on free or reduced lunch. So neither is doing well, but there's a gap. And then by race, we look at African American students. 22% of students completed A through G who were not free and reduced lunch, and about 15% who were. So I showed them this data, and I asked them, why do you think this is? Why do we see these gaps across racial groups, and then within racial groups, class. It's not just race, it's not just class. There's a mix. Because when you look, African American students, 22% who are not on free and reduced lunch, completing A through G, that is actually lower than white students who are poor and on free and reduced lunch. Why would that be? If poor white students are doing better on A through G than African American students, why would that be? It wasn't accusatory, it's an inquiry. Why would we see that? Because if we don't ask why, then we can't attack it. We can't discuss it and dialogue in it. So I shared this, and immediately, what do you think happens when you share data with district people and teachers and others in the room? What do you think the students did? This is a hard space to ask questions. Somebody just yell it out. What do you think the students did? They're like sitting there, they're just like, yeah, that's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. Until I said, hey man, why is it black kids are like this? All of a sudden they're like, what? Hey, how come white kids are like this? All of a sudden they start waking up. You start naming it. They start waking up. Oh, what's going on? It's going to get crazy in here. It's going to get crazy. They want to see something. And when I would do that, the teachers, the principals, and the counselors would get a little nervous. Like, we don't talk about Bruno here. We don't talk about Bruno. You know what I mean? So I said, well, the teachers get up, the counselors get up, a few of them, and the administrators, and they say, well, that's because in our city, we're highly segregated. Our school system is highly segregated. So what you're seeing in this data is the impact of segregation in our city. So it's not that the school district is doing this or doesn't care. It's that certain schools are in a more difficult part of town and other districts, other schools are in a different part of town. So we're a segregated district. That's the problem here. Oh, so I showed them the next slide, which was an actual school that actually had a critical mass of all these different racial groups. We saw the same thing. In fact, it was worse. It was worse. 70%, 69% of white students not on free reduced lunch complete the A through G. 39% of Latino students not on free reduced lunch complete A through G. A 40% gap at the same school. So I said, how do we explain that? The teachers and counselors just kind of were like, ooh, they were just, did I just snore? I'm sorry. So, right, so they just kind of were like, yeah, I think it's time to go. We're supposed to have a tour right now. We got to go. The kids wake up and they're like, oh, mister, we could tell you why. Oh, do tell. Why is this? Because there's a program at that school. And it's a program that specifically targets honors and AP students, and they get all of the curriculum that they need for college. They get all the counseling they need for college. Really? And then this Filipino kid jumps up and says, and they're all white. Really? Yeah, well, you know, sometimes you see 2 white folks, you've seen 10. Sometimes you see 1 black person, you've seen 10. It's called hypervisibility. So we had data. I don't have it today because I didn't want to show you too many slides. So we had data, and we looked at it, and we looked at the program. It turns out 80% of the white students at that school were in that program. And 80% of black and Latino students at that school were not in that program. And then we looked at the data for Asian American students, because Asian American students were doing really well, supposedly, in that school. And we disaggregated the Asian American data. And it turns out, because that school had a critical mass of Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese. Turns out, the Asian American students that were in that program were Korean and Chinese. Vietnamese students were not, proportionately. So the data allowed us to ask each other, not to accuse, but to ask each other. And it was the students, if we can go to the next slide, it was the students who sat there as the counselors, the teachers, and others were kind of like trying to figure out, because they didn't want to look at this data before. They did not want to engage it for fear where it may go, like they're doing something wrong, but it is what it is. So James Baldwin, anyone here of James Baldwin? If you haven't, oh my God, you should. Just Google him. Just Google him. It's like, pow. He said, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And that's a really powerful lesson for us. Our students see what we do. Our teachers see what we do. Our administrators see what we do. So we have to think of this in the context of our system, of how do we ask each other hard questions. And then when we say AUHSD is a model for this, we got to ask, how do we know? How do we know? And do we have to be a model? Or can we just be? Let's just do right by us, and it'll take care of itself. But we're forced to compare ourselves because our parents want to know. They want to know. So we have to do that. But if we just do what we do best, is trust in each other, asking the hard questions, is what we're being asked and implored to do through this process. And I'm grateful for AFC for doing that with us. So I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. Just think about that regularly as you do your work or as you engage. If we go to the next slide, I want to quickly just show what happened to us in the pandemic around employment. There's a lot of discussion about what's the purpose of education, purpose of schools. And there is some conversation about whether we should keep pushing college to our students. Not everybody should go to college, right? But they should have the choice. I think is what most of us argue on this front. Not everybody should. But some, their only choice is the military. Some, their only choice is work. Some, their only choice is no choices. At the very least, we should, which is why I appreciate the pledge and what we're doing with A2G, is give them the choice. Because if they don't, choices will be made for them. This is, I'm sorry that it's not readable. I thought it would be something different. But so up to the white part on the left side, those are unemployment rates by education level. So you could actually see the lines from where you're sitting probably. The top line on the white side on the left is up until February or March 2020. What happened in March 2020? The pandemic, right? We got hit. Actually, 19. So you see that the blue line at the very top is folks who do not have a high school diploma, the basic. That's their unemployment rate before pandemic. It's 8%, 9%. At the very bottom is red, folks who have a college degree, it's about 2%. It's about 2%. So in our economy, if you have a degree, you're protected. Even if you're still working at Carl's Jr., you have a job. Folks who don't have a high school diploma will struggle to even get a job at Carl's Jr. That's what happens in our economy. So it's really, really important. But most importantly, when we have economic shocks to our system, be it through recession or downturns or a pandemic, look what happened. Right at, what is it, March 2019. You see the blue line just skyrocket up? 25% of people that did not have a high school diploma, no employment. No employment. Folks who had a college degree, the red, they also went up too, but they're at 7, 8%. So the unemployment rate is times 3 during a pandemic when we especially needed to sustain some work. So education pays, and it's valuable the way we're trying to think about critical inquiry for our students in that educational process. If we go to the next slide, and then, man, we're in a crisis, ladies and gentlemen, young folks, old folks, seasoned folks, mama, papa, babonis. This is BA degrees in the state of California, and I show this to my students, they're like, dang, we thought it was bad, but, and this is why data is so important. We may think we know, but when you see it, you're like, dang. So this is baccalaureate degrees, all adults in California who are over 25 years old. African Americans who are adults in the state of California, 22% of African American men have a BA degree. 25% of African American women. Intersectionality is the difference between men and women and how we're pursuing education. For Asian Americans, and this is in the aggregate, so for different subgroups of Asian Americans, it's actually not this high, but this is the aggregate, right? 53% of Asian American men have a baccalaureate degree. It doesn't mean they got it here, they may have got it in their home country. 50% of Asian American women. Latinos, which is actually our largest racial ethnic group at AUHSD, and more than half of Anaheim, 11% of Latino males have a baccalaureate degree. 11%. 13% of women have a baccalaureate degree. Pacific Islander students, or adults, 18% have a BA degree, men and women about equal. White men, 44% have a BA degree in the state of California, white women, 41%. Does that surprise you? For many, it's not surprising. It's surprising that it's that bad, that the gaps are that huge. Because we know that once you go to college, your children's likelihood to go to college, triple. 3 times 4. So if 11% and 13% of our adults in Latino communities don't have a BA degree, that's where schools have played a critical role. But the entire burden almost falls on the school to do that because our first-gen parents don't have access to that kind of cultural knowledge. Go to the next slide. So again, how do you know? How do we know? How do we decide? And what or who informs us? And I'll finish up with this with you. And I show this in my class, it's a trip. We think we know ourselves. Let me ask this before I ask for this data to come up. And I'm asking in a Latino context. So let me hear some of your thoughts of what proportion of the United States is Latino or Latina or Latinx? Is it 10%, 20%, 40%? What proportion of the United States is made up of a Latinx demographic? 45? 45%. Do I hear 50? Do I hear 50? Do I hear 55? 45%. Anybody else? 30? 70? Damn, no wonder Taco Bell is huge. So, all right, keep that in your mind. In fact, I'm going to ask you if you have something, just write it down real quick or just keep it in your mind. What do you think the percentages of Latinos is in the United States, right? Second question, of all Latinos in the United States, how many are US born? How many are US born? Of all Latinos, what proportion are US born, which means what proportion are immigrant? Write that down, put it in your memory bank. Third question. Of Latino immigrants, what proportion are undocumented? Or as our legal documents say, illegal aliens. Isn't that kind of sad? Illegal aliens. Undocumented immigrants. Let me hear somebody yell that out. At the risk of being racial, what proportion of Latino immigrants are undocumented immigrants? 65%? 65%? 70%? Raise your hand if you think it's less than 10%. Raise your hand if you think it's about 20 to 30%. Raise your hand if it's more than 50%. Undocumented folks, a big issue, big issue. Let me show you the slides, because there was a national survey done asking at the national level that was commissioned by some Latino organizations of folks in the United States, and they disaggregated it by race, which is really cool, right? So they asked white folks, how many Latinos are in the United States? How many are undocumented? How many immigrant? So I'm going to read it to you because I know it's kind of small. So the first one is, what proportion of the United States is Latino? So African Americans responded that about 44% of the United States is Latino, almost half. Asian Americans said about 35%. White folks said about 37%. Latinos are like, we're 45%, baby. Now, bunny. It's actually 19%. It's like, are you serious, Raza? You even don't know who we are? Right? Next question. Next question. What share of Latinos are US born? So 40% of African Americans said that they think about 40% of Latinos are US born, which means 60% are immigrant. Asian Americans, 31%, they say it's 31% of Latinos are US born. 34% of white folks say Latinos are US born. Latinos say 42% of us are US born. It's 67%. 2 out of 3 Latinos in the United States are US born. But when you hear the term, it's immigrant, even we believe that. That's how powerful the messaging is about who we are, or is it? Last one, what proportion of Latinos are undocumented? This one's really cool. 39% of African Americans say that, African Americans say that 39% of Latinos are undocumented. So 4 out of 10 Latinos are undocumented, according to black folks in the United States. 30%, Asian Americans say 30% are undocumented, Latinos. Whites say 32%. Latinos say 36% are undocumented. It's 13%. So when I discuss this with my class and some other communities, they're like, what, man, we're stupid. You know what I mean? And what's cool about it, and what's hopefully can help guide our work, is that data shouldn't drive us. It shouldn't drive us. That's a thing. People should drive us. Conversation should drive us. Our values should drive us. That's how we interpret data, and we analyze data together, so we could realize, oh my gosh. So the question is now for Latinos, why do they think that 1/3 of us is undocumented? So let me show you some of the data, and then I'll finish my time. Okay. Oh my God. Okay, so some of you know I was city council. My apologies, Cypress and other cities. Your cities don't have GIS mapping yet on your website, so I would urge you to actually urge your cities. When I got on council, I was working with, at that time, Principal Saldivar, and we were trying to figure out what is the social context of Anaheim High School around it. Everybody talks about all this stuff, but we don't have actual mapping. So I asked our city GIS department, our planning folks, hey, can we develop visual maps that the public can actually use, or that I as a councilor could download and look up and see what proportion of the city is poor and where are they concentrated, what proportion has internet access, where are they concentrated? And they said, yeah, we could do that, and they did it. And we met with Robert, and Robert's like, here's some other things you might want to add. And so this is available for those in Anaheim. If you're not in Anaheim, I would urge you to talk to your council people or your leaders in Cypress, say, we need this in Cypress. We need this in Buena Park. We need this in Stanton. So this is Anaheim, so my apologies again for those who may not be, but I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures of the power of this. Rent burden. How many of you have heard of this term, rent burden? And this is to contextualize the work you're doing in LCAP, why it matters so much, and why data matters. But also that when we critique ourselves as a system, as a school system, that we also recognize our schools cannot overcome poverty. They cannot. Michael Matsuda and I are in a shouting match about that right now. Because he said, you're ridiculous, that's my job. That's the mission of educators, is to actually overcome the struggles of society. And I said, I agree with you, Superintendent Matsuda, but we can't sustain it. You can't ask teachers to overcome the poverty and the neglect and the indifference of a society on our kids and their families. We can't do it. Classified people can't do it. They themselves are in that space. Our students are struggling with their mental health around this. So this rent burden is a really important linchpin. And I say schools cannot overcome poverty by themselves, is what I'm suggesting. By themselves. It's not sustainable. It's hard, because when we don't get the expectations or the data that we want to come out of our schools, who are we going to blame? Ourselves. Well, actually, this is how it's going to play out, probably. It usually does in most spaces that I've had a chance to be in. The test scores, as much as our district pushes against that, we as parents are like, well, look at Irvine. Well, look at Stanton. Some of those schools are doing pretty good. Why isn't ours in the elementary level? What about Irvine? What about Newport Beach? Have you been to Newport Beach? We're not there. And then it sounds like an excuse. It sounds like an excuse. So what happens is parents begin to put pressure, and then teachers begin to be like, well, I don't have the resources. Or teachers begin to say, well, at the high school, we're doing what we got, what we get. What we get is junior high kids that aren't ready. And then the junior high teachers are like, what? Well, we're getting them from the elementary district. They're not quite ready. And then the 5th and 6th grade teachers are like, well, we're getting them from 3rd and 4th grade. They're not quite ready. And then 3rd grade says, it's those kindergarten teachers, man. They're not teaching them how to read. And then invariably somewhere the janitors, they don't clean up enough. It just becomes this blame game. And then ultimately it comes down to this full circle, ladies and gentlemen. The kindergarten teachers say they're not kinder ready. So now we're doing universal preschool. And in about 3 years, the preschool teachers are going to be like, they're not preschool ready. Right? And then what that does is it then takes it all full circle. It's the parents or it's the students. Something's wrong with them. And that's where I hope and expect that the culture of what we're trying to do is to say, no, data suggests there's something bigger, and that's the city data. Next slide. So rent burden is if you go back to that, if you spend more than 1/3 of your income on your rent burden. It's hard to get loans, it's hard to get your credit score, it looks bad. So this is by the different high schools, and the darker the area means that 45 to 70% of the households surrounding that area are rent burdened. They're struggling with rent. What does that mean? Kids got to work, or parents got to work more. And you ask them to be at a school meeting at 7 o'clock, they got to work. And they're tired, just like you're tired, just like we're tired. So just look at it. Look at the schools, the different schools that you may be at, Catella, Loera, Magnolia. Look at Western, my goodness. I mean, that's the primary concern for many families around Western. Can I pay rent next month? Do I got to take in another family to sublease my apartment next month? What does that do? I heard earlier about, hey, it's hard to study and honor sometimes because kids interrupt. Even harder in an apartment when you got 2 families in it, right? Even harder. So this is really critical. We contextualize our work, and we don't use it as an excuse, but as a context for our work, of why our work matters. But we also have to advocate. That's a city question, ladies and gentlemen. Rent is a city question. Affordable housing is a city question. Schools don't build affordable housing. Cities do. That's a city question. Let's not put ourselves in a situation to blame ourselves. Next slide, and then I'll finish. Internet access. We know how big that became for us. Look at it. The darker spots are folks, are households that 15 to 20% of those households do not have internet access. West Anaheim. We've known that for years in Anaheim, West Anaheim. The city's been indifferent to West Anaheim for years, neglected, but other spaces too have that same struggle. And where there is internet access, it's through smartphones. So kids are doing their stuff on smartphones, and other kids don't have to do that, right? Or they depend on libraries, and libraries aren't open all the time. So last thing I want to add and finish up with, last slide, is our good friend Ronald Reagan. So what I implore you and ask you to just think deeply about, and I've been in these different spaces, so it really needs us to do this. It's fundamentally unfair and undermines your cause, your mission in an LCAP if you're not engaging what's happening around the school. The indifference of cities about what's happening to their families. Those are politically and socially difficult questions to ask of one another, but the schools cannot overcome a lack of affordable housing. It's unfair to ask them to do it. They can mitigate it, they can be compassionate to it, but it's just, you can't do it. They don't have these issues in other districts that we compare ourselves. So the fact that we're even close to other districts is quite a minor miracle, frankly. So what I'm asking you, and hopefully you'll consider this, especially with so many young folks here and parents who support civic engagement and democracy, that what's happening with our society and our children and our families, our schools are creating spaces for us to engage with one another in conversation so we could act together about what's happening outside of our schools. That means being neighborly, of course, and being kind, but it's also saying, why do we only have one public swimming pool in the city of Anaheim? And we have a huge issue with kids and swimming and drowning, actually. Why don't we have more recreational spaces for young adolescents, 13 to 19, in our cities to make sure that they're not, as our kids are in Anaheim, 40% at risk of type 2 diabetes? Exercise. It's not just going to be resolved at the school. It's got to be done through outside spaces. So we need to advocate together is my point. And our boy here, Ronald Reagan, says when we look at data, when a city or a school say, we're all this, trust but verify. How do you know? How do we know? We have to push ourselves to that. ¿Sale vale? Does that make sense? ¿Sale vale? So thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you for the opportunity to share. See you on the streets. See you in the advocacy circles, because we have to push this, because otherwise we're just going to blame each other. So see you all out there.
All right, we're almost out of here. We might get you out of here a little earlier than expected, right? We said 7:30 on the invite. Let's see what we can do. I'm going to touch on a couple of things that our good friend Dr. Jose Moreno talked about. I'm going to connect it back to the importance work that we're doing here on our campuses, in our classrooms, and why we do believe that these problems will be solved by the folks that are in this room, and in particular our students. First meeting before we get there and close this out, that's today. You're here. Thank you again. We have our second meeting on March 9th. You will be receiving an invite along with what group, what focus group you'll be reporting to, in the next couple of weeks. Actually, probably a week and a half or so before that 2 weeks before that meeting, March 9th. So make sure that you scanned the QR code on your way in, and we're going to show that here in a second. It's up now, because that is going to verify that you were here, and then we're going to take that information, place you in a focus group, and then send you the reminder that you are reporting back here on March 9th to what location and what focus group, okay? So please make sure that you have accessed that link and filled out the short survey that you were here. Okay. Let's close this out. So Dr. Jose Moreno gave a lot of good information. He touched on the importance of data, right? Asking questions, He talked about knowing not only what's going on in the schools, but around in the community. Let me ask you this. For those of you that are parents and educators and administrators and staff on our campuses, how many of you guys had these kinds of conversations in your classrooms when you were in school? Raise your hand. If you had these kinds of conversations about the community issues that are facing our neighborhoods, poverty, homelessness, rent burden, right? Food deserts. How many of you guys had those conversations and had lessons on those conversations when you were in class a couple years ago when you were in school? I don't see any hands coming up. So how do we expect our youth to graduate from our schools and solve these problems if we're not giving them the opportunities to be inspired in their classrooms to go out and solve these problems? We have to expose them to these problems. We have to have conversations about these problems. We have to look at solutions to these problems. That is the importance of what we're doing in our district. Our community schools model, right? Collecting the data, needs and assets, bringing it back into the classroom, into the lessons, building relevant and engaging lessons that changes the experience of a student from a traditional teach to the test to an engaging and meaningful experience, so that they are inspired to now grow up, come out of our school systems, and do the work that Dr. Jose Moreno just talked about and solve these problems with around poverty and rent burden and homelessness and all the things that we talked about, crime, right? So the LCAP process feeds right into that, because for the students that are not successful in our classrooms, that are building these types of cultures, right? Our schools that are building these welcoming cultures, engaging environments in the classroom, safe environments, and are still falling through the cracks when we're doing all that. Now what else can we do? What more can we do? Right? So that's where that data from a critical and inquiry lens comes into play, right? So here is our framework, and I'm going to just remind you one more time about the importance of our framework to our district, to our parents, to our students, and to our at-large community. When we talk about purpose and voice, how do you go back to your educational experience? Do you remember having a voice, finding purpose, finding relevance in your educational experience when you were in school? Do you remember talking about the 5 C's, having them intertwined into the lessons, the importance of character, kindness, compassion, love, the importance of communication, collaboration, creativity? How do you see all of that in our system? The technical skills, not only in the classroom, but then with the wraparound services that we're providing to our families and our students. Do you see the compassion? Do you see the love, the effort to really help those students that are still falling through the cracks, the ones that are called out in the LCAP? And we end with this, with our launch.